I've done a lot of power grid hacking, more than I can share. I wrote a tool called RFCAT. Many people like that. Helps some researchers break into medical devices, break into power meters, and whatnot. I can't tell you what I've done with it, but I love RFCAT. Had the opportunity to hack a lot of buildings and people. I like physical pen tests. If you've not ever done or participated in a physical pen test, let's talk later. I think that we should have a conversation. In recent years, I have been doing a lot of automotive hacking. Cars, heavy trucks, maybe some other vehicles that you may recognize. And in the last year or two, turned attention towards drones. Why? Everybody's got them. Everybody's doing it. And they represent a huge interest and problem. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Before talking about specifics of critical infrastructure things, let's do a general overview. Now, I told you, I'm not going to get deep technical, but the overview should seed your thought process and give you something to Google, give you something to email me about. You got my email address. Give you something to talk to your friends about. Most importantly, give you something to chew on as to your next addiction. It will be thing hacking, I almost guarantee it, because you're here, and it tells me a lot about you. The basics of thing hacking start out with the concept of, well, okay, before I get into here, anyone heard of Stephen Covey? He's a businessy dude. He actually does business hacking. He doesn't do binary stuff, but what he does do is tear apart how humans work. So, one of the best things that he said was begin with the end in mind. What is the end? Wait, why am I talking about Stephen Covey at a hacking conference? Because everything that we do should begin with the end in mind. When we're thing hacking, what is the end goal? Maybe there are multiples, and that's okay. You don't have to pick one, but you may have to pick one to go after. The first thing, I want to control the device. The second thing, I want to control all the devices. The third thing, I want to control all the devices remotely. Yada, yada, yada. There are stepping stones, there are building blocks, there are parts that we piece together, but that's the end goal. Most often, we begin thing hacking by trying to obtain firmware. Now, obtaining firmware is a lot easier in many cases than you may think. Oftentimes, the software or firmware updater can be subverted to provide firmware, and provide your own firmware. It's a wonderful little back and forth. If the updater isn't available, many things have the flash on an SD card. You can pop it out, stick it in your laptop, and modify the file system. If not, I went directly to the hard stuff, BGA, ball grid array removal, but the flash may be external to the system on chip, and you may be able to tap into that flash, maybe without even removing it from the board. You may have to pull it off. It may be BGA. It may be easy things like a TSOP where the pins are just sticking out the sides. Pull it off if you need to, attach there, and you can interface with the flash directly. There are many different ways to get firmware. This is part of your reconnaissance mission. Gain as much information as you can up front. How do I get firmware? I want to set that goal in your mind because it is a pivot point to many other things that thing hacking entails. Something of extreme interest, both for pulling firmware as well as hacking a device, is JTAG, or hardware debugging tools. Who here's heard of JTAG? Can anybody tell me what it stands for? Spit it out loud. Joint Task Action Group. Yeah, that clearly says hardware debugging. Turns out JTAG started out as a method of testing that soldering took place correctly. So you've got a board with a dozen or 100 components soldered down to it, and a smart component, the really more expensive ones, that there may be 100 pins, or not 1,000, but a couple hundred pins on a chip. How do I know that every one was soldered correctly? So JTAG, the Joint Task Action Group, put together this standard of signaling to a device basically to push out the values that are on the pins. So I can tell if something is reading a 1 or reading a 0 from the wire itself. Fast forward a few years, somebody said, this is kind of interesting. We've got this state machine. It's already built into the silicon, and it actually can give me the ability to insert instructions and control the device. That's how JTAG is thought of typically today. The concepts, when you start digging into JTAG, its history comes known, and you'll beat your head up against a wall if you don't understand where it came from. So that's why I said it here today. Console hacking. Anybody like serial consoles? Many devices will simply have a serial port you can plug into and potentially gain complete access to the device. Maybe it'll just spit log messages at you. Somehow it will give you information and potentially control over a device that will allow you to debug and tear into and find secrets and all sorts of wonderful things. Warning, consoles can be secured, and in some cases they are. Don't let that dissuade you. What is the number one rule of hacking? Just because it could be fixed doesn't mean it is. I need to know. Bus sniffing and module and manipulation. You have a PCB. It's got a microcontroller, a network adapter, whether it be Ethernet or wireless or whatever. They communicate typically over bus wires. Or you see the leads going over the PCB, but it's basically a bus. Using specialized tools, or something that you can drum up on your own, oftentimes you are able to tap onto these buses, consume the data going over them, and know what's going on, and sometimes take over. Most often, actually, you can take over. Module reuse. This is something that I ran into really early in hardware hacking. Turns out, these chips that are so cool and do amazing things, a lot of different manufacturers want to be able to use the same ones. So somebody gets smart and they say, I'm going to make this module that just does all the radio circuitry or whatever the whiz-bang magic is of this concept. And then all the different manufacturers can solder that straight to their board and they're gone. They don't even have to worry about what the thing does or all the nuances. We give them a simple, maybe AT interface. You guys have seen those, right? So you type AT and then a command, kind of like your old modems. Well, if I'm able to do that, if I'm able to pull off a module, I can give the same AT commands. What AT command should I give? Well, I don't know. Sniff the bus that configures the thing before you remove it. There are many other target-specific attacks. Too many to go into, but hopefully this is enough to lay out the thinking and give you a platform to dive into hacking things. Some friends of mine put together a cool document called the AMI attack methodology, specifically detailing how to hack or how to attack and do security assessments of smart meters. These guys put it out there so that vendors could quiver in their boots, and even so that they could fix their shit before actual testing began. Some of my friends have referred to this as the how-to of hardware hacking. I didn't say it, but so I pointed out to there. I'll have a link to it in the later slides, or just Google AMI attack methodology. Well, I already went over some of this. So the goals of thing hacking, I want to break into one device and gain complete control. This is an obtainable goal almost all the time. Next step, I want to break into them all. Once I've taken over my test device, I look for shared secrets, for example. Maybe an SSH password that is the same on every device. I throw enough compute power at that, and I own all the devices, assuming I've got some remote access to all the devices. And then I want to be able to do this all remotely, so that I can take over all the cars from China. One thing about thing hacking that I often miss, now there are many smart people who don't miss this, but I forget about if I'm not careful. Hacking the back end that supports things. IoT, generally kind of worthless on its own, right? Normally we've got these minimally intelligent devices that phone home to the cloud and are controlled by the cloud. I don't know about you. Anybody smart lights in their house? Smart heat? What do you do when you roll this stuff out? You register it in the cloud. Yay! There are stepping stones to getting to these goals, though. This is the end in mind part. Let's back up a second. So these are obtainable goals, particularly breaking into one device. But how do I get there? Gaining access to potentially vulnerable code. Getting the firmware. Whether I get it off the internet in an update service, or I pull it directly off the device, getting that firmware allows me to dig through and read like a novel how this device works. Now, I may not understand the language very well at first, but I promise you, if you do invest the time and maybe bring some friends, you will learn this language and you'll love it. Almost guaranteed. I know I do. Gaining terminal access or some other control. For example, I've got a device that the thing is, it's a Linux box. Embedded Linux box, it controls the lights. Once I gain control of the system, not only can I obviously have access to the firmware, but I have a way to interact with running processes. So it's the difference between disassembling firmware code and debugging to bring the live environment to bear. Both are very important. I would never just suggest debugging. Disassembling has so many other aspects to it, but the combined nature of, but by combining them, you can gain so much extra information. So we want to debug target software. This is how we identify weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and validate that they're weak. I can point to vulnerable code in disassembly, but I've always got this little niggling thing in the back of my mind until I've written code that actually proves it. I want to make use of trust relationships or credentials. Sometimes this is something that my car has access into my OEM that I can't get to from the internet. Or this thing has a password that is used on every other thing and gives me access to everybody's. And then the next stepping stone I want to call out is the ability to enumerate and participate in a network. So for example, advanced metering. Typically you've got a mesh network. This mesh network tends to be fairly dynamic. You don't want to have to go back to the head end and rewire how routing happens in all of your meters because I introduce a new meter to the group. No. You install a new meter, you have it provisioned, it knows how to participate, but you plug it in, it broadcasts out, and then listens in to whatever's going on in the area in the network that it's supposed to be on. But if I can do that without having to have a power meter that's provisioned, well, maybe I need one to start, maybe the first time. But if I can use RFCAT and participate in a network, enumerate all the meters around me, this is very interesting things. Again, this is not necessarily ownership, but it's really cool, and it is the stepping stone which is required for owning all the things. Is it wrong for me to want my code to run on everything? I hope not. So that's the basics of thing hacking. We got a lot of security people in the room, right? Raise your hands. You can own up to it. I know it's a hacker conference. I promise you no tomatoes will be thrown. Let's talk about defense. How do we think about these things? Mr. Atlas, my company made a really awesome embedded device, and I think it's secure. Okay. I don't like to accept that on your word, even if you're very smart and knowledgeable. Let's prove it, but how do you think about your thing? First of all, every microcontroller, otherwise known as an MCU, is a target. Your thing may have 5. It may have 1. Unknown at first. But everyone is a target. Physical access is generally considered pretty much a win. There are some hard things that are making that not true necessarily, or at least not easy. But overall, in general, physical access is a win. Any way that an attacker can interact with an MCU is attack surface. So if the MCU communicates over a Bluetooth network, or a Wi-Fi network, or a proprietary wireless network, like your tire pressure management sensors in your tires, they participate in a proprietary wireless running in the ISM band. Oh my gosh, RFCat works there. Anyway, this is attack surface. Maybe this is a JTAG port that they've removed the resistors between the controller and the pins. If I had a nickel for every time somebody thought that would work. Anything an MCU can even possibly do. This is a really important point. In fact, it's the whole purpose of this picture. Anything that your microcontroller can possibly do based on physics, because of what it is connected to, an attacker can do once compromised. I'm going to say it again. I've had this conversation so many times. It seems earth-shattering. I apologize if this is totally old hat for you. But anything that a microcontroller can physically do or control because of the way it is soldered to the board, an attacker can do once compromised. If it's raw firmware, the firmware just gives up the ghost. If it's an OS, maybe you've got unprivileged access, but there's no privilege escalation bugs in Linux or BSD, are there? It can't do that. Necessary swearing. Bullshit. It can't do that. It's completely dependent upon the schematic, the way the thing's wired in. I'm beating a dead horse here because I've had the conversation too many times. So I want it burned into your memory. The firmware cannot save you. Assume an attacker will pwn any MCU that they can touch. And probably one or two extras beyond that. Anybody heard of Wink? Wink is a home automation, home control vendor. I want to give them mad props. They're giving out their devices saying, please hack this. They're so ballsy, they're leaving titles of pins on the board. This is a JTAG or a single wire debugging port. This is your 433 megahertz kitty. And they've got debug pins called out. Awesome. Normally we're having to dig for those because the vendors are scared. These guys are like, come at me, bro. So when you're thinking about a thing, whether it's your thing to defend or your thing to, well, other things than defend. What are the 4 easiest ways to pwn this MCU? Is there a serial console broken out on the board? Normally they leave the pins just waiting for you to solder onto. Is there JTAG, and is it secure? There are multiple layers of security in modern, some of the best microcontrollers today. In the past, typically there's only been one. We're getting better or worse, in my opinion. How might I influence this microcontroller without gaining code execution? Okay, so this is a different question, but it gets lumped into an important category of what do I need to consider. Okay, how can I influence this thing without executing my code based on how it's written? This is a harder question, but often one that can lead to catastrophic results if you're not paying attention. Okay, I pwned this MCU, now what? Now what? Exactly. How is the thing wired to the board? What kinds of stuff do I have in it that might give me access to another 10, another million devices, or the back end? Now what? And then as a defender, how can I make pwnage take significant time? Time is money. Whether you're a hacker or not, or whether you're a defender or not, the hackers, they've also got a budget. They got to feed their family. Granted, we have nation states that are paying them pittance, but still, money is the thing. And if it becomes time-consuming enough, or costly, whether that's money or brain bleed, they'll probably take a different route. And then the last question, how can I make whatever noticeable? Is that something within the firmware that phones home? That if it's not phoning home to the back end, that's noticeable? Is it something where there's a very, very difficult calculation based on something that might at least trigger the first time an attacker takes over because they're not knowing to look for it? How can I make this noticeable? Because what are the core tenets of incident handling? I need to have inspection, planned things to do when I see something wrong, and then the ability to do it. Well, if I never see it, what good does it do me? Critical infrastructure targets. This is just a couple days ago. Feds are warning that energy, aviation companies, and critical manufacturing, nuclear, and water have been under significant attack over the last few months, ever since May. This is not new. Overall in the world, typically critical infrastructure is considered, oh my gosh, I'm going slow, to be basically these things: transportation, electricity, public health, gas and oil, water, security, aka things that go boom, telecom, and financial. Telecom and financial have received a whole lot of work. I leave that often to other people because these other things up here, they're a lot juicier and they're a lot more wide open and kind of scary if they go bad. Turns out telecom and financial depend on electricity more than just about anything else. And so you see actually most of these end up with a tier factor. You take out one, you actually take out several. US breaks this down into 18 areas of critical infrastructure, including, if I'm not mistaken, they have something called out for critical infrastructure as the agencies that take care of the critical infrastructure. Hey, that's kind of cool. So let's talk just a little bit about several key areas of critical infrastructure. Why? Again, I'm trying to dangle a carrot and see if anything elicits that addictive nature inside of you. So energy. Energy can be broken up into basically advanced metering, or the distribution end, and control systems, SCADA. Now, I mean, they break it down differently. They say, this is distribution, here's the transportation that goes from generation to distribution, blah, blah, blah. But typically, you're going to focus on AMI devices and networks. SCADA and back office. And these are tightly coupled. So you have AMI systems that are deployed. They've got a back office component that controls them, and that's linked into their SCADA systems, which allow for, I don't know, the distribution main stuff to make allotments for large amounts of houses to use more energy or less energy. If you are into microcontrollery things and you want to hack things, AMI is your baby. If you're interested in easy pickings, but kind of obscure protocols, go for SCADA. There's tons of crafty stuff in SCADA. They created SCADA or industrial control systems. You may see them as RTUs or PLCs. They created these things 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and the idea was they're never going to be connected to a public network. I don't think that anybody is not connected to the internet anymore. If you're into more, let's hack some Intel-based things and kind of stay into the software realm and servers and stuff. Your ERP systems are just shit. They're the easiest way to take out critical infrastructure, in my opinion, once you get access to them. So getting started, pick an area to focus on. AMI, learn to reverse hardware, firmware, and radio. Cool stuff. This is a lifelong journey that will give you many benefits throughout years to come. SCADA ICS, learn Modbus, DNP3, other ICS protocols. There are proprietary ones, there are open ones. These are some of the easy, well, Modbus is the easiest. It's unencrypted, unauthenticated. You just send something and things happen. Build a small lab. You can get, for a couple $100, you can get a starter kit PLC from Siemens. Siemens is one of the biggest names known in ICS. Talk to your favorite vendor. Phoenix Contact is a great one. Write that down. I didn't put it in the slides. Phoenix Contact is a great vendor, very security-minded, very willing to work with the community. You may be able to get your hands on hardware very easily. And talk to your local power company. Not like call them up, hey, so I have DTE Energy. I'm one of your customers. Can I hack your stuff? No, that's not the conversation I'm talking about. Talk to their security people. See if you can build a relationship. Some of them may be willing to float you a loan of equipment, talk to you, bring you into the fold. Maybe. I know Consumers Energy has been amazing in pushing forward the security of overall AMI and attempting to fix SCADA. So, talk to them. Medical! Yay! This slide scares me, and I made it. But, I mean, this is kind of cool. That's kind of scary. But this stuff about implants, that scares me. One of my best friends is diabetic. He lives with a pump. Up until 2 years ago, I could issue commands to that pump to kill him. I don't like this. Very important. There's a difference here. You'll find this a lot in thing hacking. There's a difference between full OS thing hacking and raw firmware thing hacking. Many things have an embedded OS, like a real OS, like Linux or embedded Windows, heaven forbid. A raw firmware has something where the code hooks into all the interrupt handlers and does all the things. You don't have a Linux, you don't have an Etsy password, Etsy shadow. So figuring out that breakdown is first. In fact, medical devices fall pretty much distinctly on these two lines. You've got the small embedded things like your pump and your pacemaker. You don't run Linux on your pacemaker. It's a bad idea. I love Linux. I don't want that on my pacemaker. And then you've got the stuff that walks around a hospital with you and can kill many, many people who are running embedded Windows and embedded Linux. Is it Wi-Fi enabled? Is it using a proprietary wireless? These are all things that are very interesting. It's a smorgasbord. You get to choose. Go focus on things. Billy Rios is amazing in public health, safety, security. Read some of his stuff. He'll get you started. If you're interested, there is a list of medical devices, about 40,000 medical devices at these two websites. This one gets you to here. And basically you can just download an entire list of all the different kind of medical devices available. Again, OS-based, raw firmware-based. Recently, the Medical Device Cybersecurity Act of 2017 has been pushed and is calling for cyber report cards. If you were ever interested in hacking medical things and making the world a better place, I hope, right now is the time. Skills to master, it depends. It's all over the map. Radio with your HackRF and your Yardstick 1, your RFCat, good FET for actual interfacing with hardware, doing JTAG debugging and SPI. I just love this picture. And this is Vivisect, disassembly of firmware. Reversing hardware and firmware, doing Wi-Fi. Hey, if Wi-Fi is your thing, Wi-Fi is still really good for a lot of places. Hacking your cars, hacking your medical devices. You'll find Wi-Fi can be actually hacking your drones. You'll see that in a minute. Gas and oil. It's very, very similar in nature and technology to electric. A lot of the equipment, the ICS you'll see, is the same stuff. Maybe it's branded for gas and oil. But basically, the idea is the same. I need to turn things on, I need to turn things off, I need to check sensors on stuff. In electricity, you break stuff, power grids drop. And as we remember from 2003, can take power from all the way up here to start up out towards New York. Gas and oil, you make things go boom. Kind of like that one. You can also make pipes erupt. Overpressuring pipes is a big problem. I'm not giving you ideas. Please don't do this. But you need to understand the impact so that you can drive home the impact to whoever's making the decisions, hopefully making you some money in the process. OT versus IT. This is a religious war. Some of you may know about it already. Operational technology versus information technology. The people on IT side, they run your servers and your laptops, and they've got your Norton antivirus or whatever semantic thing is kicking out. OT, they're like, I'm going to guard the shit out of this thing and make sure that only these untrustworthy people are able to touch it, and whoever took over their browser. But those IT folk don't know what we need. You can't patch my damn ICS. One of the cool things about gas and oil is it gets you out in the open. There are oil rigs in the middle of the ocean or the Gulf. You know, if you're hacking on things, you may find this kind of cool thing, unless you start blowing things up, and then it's bad. They're a bit lagging behind in standards and acceptance of industry leadership of standards. Typically, it's security companies writing white papers right now going, hey, y'all need to do this, instead of maybe a NIST or an industry organization saying, this is what Marathon is doing. This is what Shell is doing. We're laying it out. Come join us. Hunters are needed. These guys have been probably the most pwned area of critical infrastructure to date. Water. Water. Who thinks about water? I mean, it's just a bunch of shit. Or drinking water. One or the other. They're just in the same boat as a couple of the others. They use the same types of ICS, some of the same comms, and I will tell you that water and many of the other critical infrastructures suffer from really bad security on wireless communication. Hey, it does frequency hopping. That makes me just like the military. Bullshit. No, it doesn't. Does the military have things that pop up going, hey, can I play too? Oh yeah, sure, here's the stuff. No. Does yours? Yeah, absolutely. I can go buy your frickin' thing off of eBay. I'm trying to measure my words here. I can use the same device that you used. I won't drop vendors' names. I will not drop vendors' names. And within 18 hours, I can brute force all the security options that the thing has and be on your Modbus watching commands and issuing my own. So this is impacting water, but a lot of other critical infrastructures as well. Their physical touch points are weak. They're generally spread out. You've got stuff in every neighborhood. You want a device? Hop a chain link fence. It's not even barbed wire most of the time. Wireless comms, they're really wonderful. I just threw this picture in because I liked it. But still, water is a really interesting sector. They're not getting a lot of love right now, but they're really important. I think you would agree. You don't want the two types of water stuff to get maybe accidentally joined. Transportation, I've been saving this till last. It's my first love right now and has been for a number of years. You've got transportation broken down into a bunch of different categories, and they're all in different stages. They all have different landscapes in politics. You've got your automotive, your light-duty trucks and cars. You've got heavy truck, including all your big rigs, your dump trucks, and I almost mentioned a vendor, sorry. Your stuff out in the field harvesting, sorry. And military stuff. Aviation and drones. And these are actually fairly different areas, but I want to throw them in together because they're both flying things. You got rail and ships and space. I'm not really going to talk about them today. Chris has talked enough about rail to kind of embarrass everybody. And ships and space are still kind of keeping things close to the chest, although I will say that some of the space companies that I've seen have surrounded themselves with really smart people, at least. And they are friends of some of my coworkers. Let's lay a little bit of landscape. Sorry, I see OEM faces in the crowd. I hope I don't offend anybody. You've got OEMs who build cars. You have suppliers who make the parts that go into cars, the electronic control units, the ECUs. But they have to make the ECUs by spec that's been given to them by the OEMs. I'm not quite certain why it's still taking time for management of these companies to recognize that this two-step is a dance that they both have to play, and that security handling has to be done partnering. But anyway, it's not there yet. Unless one of you wants to speak out and say, no, that's not true. Adding complexity to the plot, there's this nifty little rule called the right to repair law. This means dealerships are not allowed to be the only ones who can repair cars. Now, there's some software that dealerships have access to that a typical mechanic can't, but a mechanic needs to be able to replace that engine control module and at least have the ability, if they can afford it, to buy the software and the licensing to flash the thing and to make it configure correctly. Okay? I like this because it also tends to mean they need to be able to download firmware. And then there's not really a rule or a law, but there's this culture of right to modify. And I'm seeing some squirming in the room because OEMs are having to struggle going, how do we protect this shit so that people don't die and still let people modify their car? It's kind of like the big secure bootloader argument of the last decade. Well, remember the first beginning? The start of it was, I can't load Linux on my box. Now, we've overcome those hurdles, but that was the bitch at the start. Including new technologies that protect can cause a lot of difficulties to modify and to do things differently. I don't know why I keep clicking at the screen. Getting started. If automotive hacking is something that interests you, you have a car. You can go buy something from a junkyard, probably. Get to know and research CAN bus and tools that allow you to hack CAN bus. I'm mentioning CanCat because my team made it. I like it. There are others. Learn other buses if you're interested. Look into the cars that are interesting to you. They all do it a little differently. And in fact, that causes a lot of consternation when it comes to security and security research. But got various different technologies. You can Google them yourself. Older stuff, if you have something that was made before 2007, you may have other protocols that are not standardized, like CAN bus. Get to know diagnostics tools. So oftentimes, there's a universal diagnostics system spec that allows for your $5 dongle that you plug into your car. How they can do that without compromise? Nah, that's a different discussion. Your $5 dongle that you plug into your car and diagnose your car on your phone app. They're making use of standardized diagnostics that were put out, they've been put out for years in public. Get to know how to use them, how to tinker with them, and using CanCat, for example, how to tinker with them in a really interesting way. Now, oftentimes there's some security measures that have to be overcome. It's a different discussion we can talk later. USB to flash your infotainment system. It's a big deal. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Hey, that keeps showing up. Telematics in the internet. So who here's heard of the Chris and Charlie hack of 2015? The Jeep hack? Okay. Do you know the details about the Jeep hack? Basically, Jeep had introduced an infotainment system made by Harman. I'm going to call them out because Chrysler actually took it on the chin for these guys without ratting them out. Harman created an infotainment system with an internet uplink, and they were very, very friendly, very good to work with. They put a D-bus server. If you're not familiar, a D-bus server is just a message bus that you can subscribe to messages and push messages to. If you're running a Linux desktop or laptop, you're running D-bus because all of your apps talk together this way. They put a D-bus server listening on a port on the internet, unauthenticated, on every Uconnect vehicle. So what Chris and Charlie started off doing really wasn't hacking, it was almost port scanning. And that was because we're wrapping telematics in an internet connectivity. Get to know these things. These are tickle points that you will love. Recently, like within the last week, there's been a press release providing security measures that are being put into practice by a bunch of different OEMs. Some of you may have seen this already. Cultivating a cybersecurity culture, adopting a cybersecurity lifecycle for vehicle development, assessing security functions through testing phases, testing phases? I like this. Managing a security update policy, providing incident response and recovery, and improving information sharing amongst industry actors. These are some good rules. It's time to jump in. If you have any passion for cars or OEM back-end systems, right now is the time. Heavy truck. Very similar in nature to automotive, but a couple key differences. First of all, their CAN network is actually called J1939. They have specialized adapters. They got a secret decoder ring and a special handshake. The cool part of this is that J1939 is available. You got to buy it, but it's public. You can download it. Many of the messages that are sent on a J1939 bus, you can read about. You don't have to reverse engineer them. And it's not just for that Chevrolet or that Ford or that Toyota particular model and year. Turns out, revving the engine, good to go between a couple vendors I won't name. Sorry, I almost lost it there. They're a bit more open, they're standardized, and they're a lot less, hey, this is my particular make and model for this year, and this ECU is only used on that. You know, it's kind of like pick and choose. Choose your own adventure by Heavy Truck? Yeah, so I want that over there, and okay, which telematics unit should I have? Well, that one. Okay, yeah, everybody likes that one. So we end up with heavy trucks that are kind of a mishmash of things, which is wonderful. It's a great thing for an industry. It's also not bad for a security industry or a hacker industry. It actually goes back and forth. It pushes forward the discussion and makes it easier to test. Telematics is one of the biggest entry points to heavy truck, although many of them will have a J1939 port or some other Powerline carrier. I haven't seen Powerline carrier in a long time. I saw Powerline carrier on heavy truck stuff. Aviation and drones, and I think we're going to have to speed here. Got 11 minutes. Beat you. Okay, break this down. We got big planes, we got little planes, we got drones. Big planes are broken into two different categories. We have commercial planes, we've got military planes. None of these is like the other. So your .com planes, or actually most of your big planes, you'll see 14, 24, 28 volt DC or 115 volt. Yay, I like, oh shit, 400 megahertz? Or I'm sorry, 400 hertz? What's that mean? Well, you know that you plug into the wall at 60 hertz. Turns out at 400 hertz, you can make equipment cheaper and have electricity pushed easier and lighter. So we see weird things like this. So if you're going to set up an aviation hacking lab, you probably want something that can provide that power. Your .com airplanes, the older ones, use a standard called AirInc 429. It's kind of a more of a point-to-point type communications mechanism. And on airplanes, you think that we like redundancy in the data center. Airplanes, man, they got 2 or 3 of everything that's really important. And they got to all talk together. Newer planes use AFDX, or AirInc 664, and 653 is the standard for code. And ACS switches. Now, basically, AFDX is specialized Ethernet. Uses the same type of mechanisms for Ethernet, a lot of the same signaling, with some security specs that allow for time slicing to make sure that the things that really need to talk, they get to talk. It's been said that you can't hack an AFDX network, which I call shenanigans. Prove it. You inflate entertainment. There's also CAN bus. Believe it or not, there's CAN bus on your planes. Your infotainment systems, well, we all know that they're Linux because we have 1,000 pictures of people watching them reboot. You've got ADS A and B providing wireless connectivity, whether satellite or air to ground. This is interesting, but there's a big debate as to whether you can hack a plane over that. You can definitely subvert a pilot, but again, these comms go through a pilot's eyes before they end up doing anything, supposedly. ACARS is the original wireless protocol that allowed for transponders and back and forth messaging. Hacking people is so easy, though. I don't know why people are writing off the fact that you can hack people. True Wi-Fi. They've got these little, basically, tablets that they walk around, generally connected to a different Wi-Fi access point than what you can see. And the industry just continues to run at this idea of fly-by-wireless. I wish I could even start to address that, but I don't have time. When you get to the airports, there's a magical Wi-Fi gateway called Gatelink. This is basically, yeah, bullshit. Basically, this is, Chris! Sorry, didn't mean to hurt your ears. Basically, it's Wi-Fi at all the airports that have a backhaul into the airline's networks. I think that might be interesting. I know that we have some security for Wi-Fi. I'm not sure it's good enough for that kind of access. Oh, and when you get connected up to Gatelink, you get things like loadable software airplane parts. These are patches or module updates. I like this a lot. Except that I fly a lot. No, I don't like this. Other big planes, .mil, I won't talk too much about it. If you want to look into them, mil-spec 1553 is the standard by which communication happens. It's a lot of point-to-point stuff. I don't expect it to last for more than I don't think that it'll be the standard in 10 years. So this might be a time to be watching if you're interested in military, if you have military background, if you have the ability to speak into these things, invest. Smaller planes, easier to get your hands on. The specs are different. Drones. We got military drones, which I will not be speaking about, although we've proven that they are hackable. There are myriad commercial brands, DJI, Bebop, Parrot is their name, and then dozens of other also-rans, including those little $20 things that like flip over in your hand, or homemade. If you guys know KF, Kevin Finisterre, give him a what's up. Some code is open source. tool called, or an open source project called Ardu Pilot, which allows you to program waypoints and make your drone even smarter. Comms vary between Wi-Fi and proprietary wireless with frequency hopping, but again, the code is available. In many cases, it's either open source or you just go download and update. Basics like hair on fire, firmware reversing. You've got raw firmware, you've got OS firmware, they are completely different. If you can get your way around your Linux box, you can get your way around your OS firmware system. And you can find all sorts of cool things that run. You can pull off individual programs and find weaknesses in them. OS raw firmware is a little different. They're all basically fall into the following bullet points. Identify the entry points of code. That could be the entry point of a program, like hacking anything else on a Windows or Linux, or identifying the interrupt vector table and what happens when events happen. Then identify interesting points like memcopy or strcpy or other things that are still found in a lot of your things. Then identify the connecting code paths, figure out if you can get there, make them happen like Mr. Jared DeMott here. Draw meaning from the code. This is the beautiful part. And then determine potential weaknesses from that meaning. A word on collaboration. OEMs and suppliers, I already said it, work together. Tech people, get to know each other. Management will figure it out. You want to be ready. Telematics vendors, talk to me. Internal collaboration. Don't be a dick to your internal people. If you have teams and one guy is vying for power and control, something's going to get very broken. As a security team, provide benefit. Allow people to benefit from your work, and things will be great. Don't fight for power. With power comes responsibility. With responsibility, if you're a dick, comes falling. It just happens. Can't really see this. This is a picture of Tim working on the drone hack demo. So, basically, because we can't talk about customer stuff, I wanted to just do something that I could talk about publicly. So we picked up a Bebop Parrot, and it's actually kind of embarrassing how easy it was to break. I almost don't want to tell you. But we did. Took it in. You've got a phone app and a controller. They connect up over an open Wi-Fi access point provided by the plane. Connect on a port, issue commands. So what we did, we said, yeah, we write a little client, knock off the actual controller, connect in, land the plane. Actually, I'm trying to get Tim to make a demo that makes it turn around 3 times and land like Odie. It's just embedded Linux. It's easy. Scarily easy. I don't have time for the video. Sorry. What can I do? This is actually the reason that I had the talk. Those of you who stuck around, you got it. Are you afraid of something? Are you afraid of tearing apart things? Are you afraid of learning how to do electrical connection things? Action cures fear. Run at it. Yes, I realize I just read it without reading it. This is a core concept for me. Run at it. They're not that expensive. Buy 5. Typically, you'll need 3. Dig in. Help out people. Bring friends. Say, hey, look, I got this thing. Let's go see what it has to offer us. Reach out to me if you'd like help. Playthings and playtime are welcome. If you want to give stuff to Grimm, we will make good on it. If you want to pay us to do awesome things, we'll make it worth your while. Training. Here's that gratuitous plug part. We do training as a company, including things like sex via hex, practical ARM and practical Android exploitation. These are taught at Black Hat, but we teach them other places and on client sites. Dig in, play, and hack fun. Talk to me later. I got a ton of links, and many thanks. Thank you very much.